Welcome, everybody. I'm Dan Richards. My main job today is staying out of the way of our fabulous panelists here. So we're going to talk today about productivity hacks in a variety of fashions. We're going to hear firsthand about problems and solutions that our panelists have run into. So let's start. We'll start with Matt, and we'll work our way this way. Quick question, maybe what your company does, the problem it solves, when it was founded, number of employees, and the problem that you want to talk about today.
Yeah, so Netlify is a web platform, and we help companies ship faster, be more productive, and eventually drive up revenue and conversions by building better digital experiences for their customers. I founded Netlify back in 2015. Since then, we've raised $212 million, onboarded more than 4 million developers to our platform. We are reaching more than 1 billion unique visitors to sites and apps running on Netlify every month. And we're just under 300 people running in the company right now.
Okay, and the problem you're going to talk about today, Matt?
So I'll tie back to the problem of how do we actually ship faster.
Okay, a question I think that is a hot topic for many in the audience. Okay, Vishal.
Hey, I'm Vishal Sunak. I'm from Boston. Linksquares was founded in 2015, and we're on a mission to help make in-house legal teams more effective and efficient through contract lifecycle management. That's essentially how do you get contracts from first draft all the way to sign, and then figuring out what's inside it. We've actually been an AI company for 5 years, so kind of ahead of the large language model revolution. We're excited to be part of that too. And I have 400 and maybe 20-ish employees, and today I really love to share about how we hired almost 300 people in 1 year, and some of the tips around that.
Okay, perfect. And again, I think some in the audience would like to have that problem. How do you add 300 people on in 1 year? All right, Christine.
Hey, everybody. My name is Christine Spang. I'm the founder and CTO of Nylas. We're a developer platform that makes it super simple for you to connect your end users' email and calendar accounts to applications, make use of the data, automate workflows, and just put everything in the same place. I started the company in 2013, so it'll be 10 years in August, which is really exciting. And in terms of size, we have about 130 employees at the company, and we're pretty much distributed all over the world. So the problem that I wanted to talk about today is we went remote first over the course of the pandemic and still are today. How do we stay aligned and communicate well transitioning to that remote environment?
Okay, well, why don't we start there? We'll go back in reverse order. So we've got three very different but pressing problems to talk about. So, Christine, let's talk about one or two of the things that you've done to address the challenges of 100% remote work-from-home workforce.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things that we found that really stood out as we moved to this remote-first environment was, one, it became a lot easier for people to become misaligned in terms of goals and being on the same page. And then two, we used to work a lot in person, actually, and we found that the trust and rapport that the teams had built from working in person together kind of had a timeout and an expiration date on it. So, for the first 6 months, that kind of time scale, everything seemed fine, but later we found that we needed to find some solution to getting people together face-to-face, even sometimes, in order to keep building essentially like the non-transactional rapport between people on teams and people across teams so that people could still really work effectively together. Tactically, I'd love to share some just quick tips on things that we did. One was that we moved our company-wide all-hands to be at a more frequent cadence. We actually do an all-hands with everybody in the company every other week which might seem like a lot, but I think that especially today, it's a down market. It's not the crazy times of 2021. We found that it's really important to over-communicate and that you have to essentially create your own energy and momentum. And one thing that we found was really effective was essentially pulling in people, leaders from the different teams, and even directors or managers in order to speak on behalf of their teams and really show that ownership on the progress towards their goals. And then at the leadership level, we actually found that it was really important to add in a cadence of some specific meetings each week, because it's actually really easy to talk too little when you're working fully remote, because everyone's just in their own room in some city or even not a city around the world, and you miss out on kind of the ambient communication that just naturally happens when you're in an office. So we found the solution was to add more structure, and actually for the leadership level to add in, we actually have 2 every weekly meetings for our leadership team around forecasting for our KPIs, and then just sort of sharing department updates and collaboration between departments. And that really helps drive alignment that then kind of flows down to all of our teams and keeps everyone on the same page. And then at the all hands, we also have all the teams share their updates around progress towards OKRs, which is the goal setting framework that we decided to use. Other than that, we also hired a full-time communications person to help us essentially put in structure and communicate good updates to the entire company. So Slack is something that's a really amazing tool, but it's also really easy for it to essentially become just a total mess. And so, our internal comms person, he defined a structure for what are the channel names like, for different teams, for shared channels with customers, and then also sort of put in an announcements format and cadence and coordinate amongst the company.
Okay, before we move on to Vishal, a couple of follow-up tactical questions on your all-hands meetings. First of all, global workforce, how do you deal with the variation in time zones? And secondly, what's the split between presentations versus Q&A?
Yeah, that's a great set of questions. So one is that you got to do it on Thursday. You can't do it on Friday because I'm located on the west coast of the U.S. We have a ton of people on the east coast of U.S. and Canada, as well as Europe. Luckily, no Asia or Australia, which simplifies things a little bit. But if you do it on Friday, just people in Europe get their Friday night. They don't want to spend it working. So you got to do it on Thursday, and you got to do it in the morning. So we actually do it at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. We record all those meetings, and it's available afterwards, and you can see the transcription and kind of the AI summary of sort of what went down. And then what was the second question you had?
Second question is split between Q&A and presentations.
Yeah, so the meetings are an hour each. Typically, it's around 50 minutes of presentations and updates, and then we have a form that we put out so people can submit anonymous questions, and then we'll put them into the deck and make sure we address them up front, and then any extra time that we have, we'll just take questions live, because it's really important to us to be transparent and to just keep the information flowing, and it's one of the few times that people have to be synchronously together.
So just to be clear on the timing, 9 o'clock West Coast,
yes.
Noon, kind of
Correct.
East Coast, and maybe like 6 o'clock or so in Europe, roughly?
Yep,
Ballpark?
you got it.
Okay. So, Vishal, before you hired those 300 folks in a 12-month period, what were you doing then in terms of your whole onboarding process? What was it like before you kind of had to ramp up?
Yeah, things are real manual when the company is small. You have people that are just cranking offer letters and sending them out, and then sending people emails to pick your swag or your hoodie or what kind of computer or mouse. And that was kind of the secret to how we could hire like a couple hundred people very quickly. I do want to touch on, if you're the CEO of a company, you do have to spend the most amount of time getting the executive team correct. Do you need executive team of 12 people or 6 or 8? How do you want to organize yourself first into department leads? Forget about titles for a second, but more like ownership groups. Like, who's going to own new business sales? Is that same person going to own post-sales and implementation and support, or do you need another person? Should that live in another department under another executive? Kind of have to figure those pieces out first. And then when you think about like growing an org, is really like growing the middle. Like, you don't grow the top as often as you grow the middle. You grow the middle quite a lot. And the secret to growing the middle and also just building a company is first anticipating where the company will be 6 months from now, a year from now. One example for us is we really needed an internal analytics group. We needed to have an internal analytics group that anyone in the business who needed questions that would require SQL queries and dashboards being made could go to an internal group that could help create all this for them to essentially answer any question in the business. That's an example of like anticipating the need before you have it, so that when the time comes, and you really never know when the time is going to be to invest in like an internal analytics group, if you can kind of think a little bit ahead, that's kind of key in the gateway to growing the company faster. You're not then saying, okay, it's 6 months from now, oh man, I wish we had that analytics group because we can't keep up with the data requests, or we need to centralize it all in one data warehouse so that we have like one blended view of the customer, for example. Kind of anticipate that. And then when it just comes to scaling and hiring, it's the partnership between departments and talent acquisition. Aligning on job description is like very important. That's usually the first trigger with buy-in from finance. Check it out. Then you're going out to market, hiring people, and doing that whole process. Then we use Zapier internally for many things, and one of the things that we used it for was connecting it to our e-signature platform, and then from after an offer letter is signed, automating everything else that comes after that. So if we're, say, hiring 20 people in 1 week, one person doesn't have to send 20 emails to 20 different people to tell them to pick what MacBook they want or what mouse or a trackpad they're interested in, or ask them what their hoodie size is. Everything can be running like asynchronously through emails, and I'd highly recommend Zapier. It's been an amazing product, amazing tool.
Excellent. All right, Matt. So, product iteration, critical to success, I think, for everybody in the room. So, let's talk a little bit about what you've learned helps you become more effective at kind of iterating new products.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all about like how do you ship software and changes faster to your customers, right? Like nothing we do in product development and software matters unless it goes in front of a customer, right? And there's been this meme going around on Twitter that I love that said like, we didn't choose to do this because it's easy. We chose to do it because we thought it would be easy. And it's a bit of a joke, but there's a truth to like, if you want people to iterate faster and ship faster, you want them to not think that it's hard. And often as soon as it starts becoming hard, companies start making it harder. So imagine you're like a business based on an e-commerce, and a developer someday builds an update to your like complex software stack, ships it, and what they didn't notice is that it breaks the checkout button, and now for like until that gets discovered, you suddenly lost a lot of revenue. Yeah. Often what happens is you just start putting a lot of like gates in place for like how can we avoid that error to ship live again, and we start building like complex Q&A processes, complex review processes, complex shipping processes. You start getting like a bigger and bigger gateway to shipping, and now you start going into a cadence where maybe you have a window every 2 weeks where you're rolling out a big release after all the checks. And it means that every developer, every product manager that's thinking of your product has to think about, can we get something into that release or not? No one will think like, hey, I have a little change to the checkout button, let's just roll it out, because like you needed to go through all of these steps. And suddenly you get it harder and harder to actually build anything and ship anything. Instead, if you go the other way and say like, whenever something is hard, how do we get good at doing it all the time? Like if you say, the big problem here was that it was hard to ship, and it was also hard to ship a fix for that checkout button being broken. Or if you go the other way and think, like, how do we make it so easy that we can ship an update to our site, like multiple times a day, constantly, right? Like, now it becomes like you make a little error. Well, you ship a fix immediately after, and it's gone. So that's what we've been like spending the whole time of building Netlify around, saying like, how can we take the digital experiences that companies build and put automation and workflows in place that makes it feel really easy, so they can start getting the level of throughput that leads to real innovation. And a lot of that is related to, like, instead of relying on those gates, make it really easy to ship changes, but also really easy to roll them back. So if you have a guarantee that if you ship a mistake, you can roll it back in milliseconds to the last known states, you start becoming really confident.
Right.
And we see that in, like, when we just look at our enterprise customer base today, they ship software changes to production on average 140 times a week.
Right.
And that's the kind of pace we think leads to real innovation and real throughput.
So it sounds like what you're talking about is changing the culture in terms of a bias towards experimentation and iteration, rapid fix, which is, I don't think, the culture necessarily that most engineers start with.
Yeah, and also really splitting systems apart. Of course, if every change you want to ship to change a checkout button goes through the same workflow and deployment flow as a change that implicates major data migration to your database, right? Like, then inherently you force every single developer and team that works in that product to work at the speed and security review and so on of the core data. So how can you look at your system and turn it into smaller, composable building blocks and let the ones that can move fast get unlocked to move as fast as they possibly can.
So not having one rule, but making it situational depending on the importance, the context, and the cost if it's not 100%, it sounds like.
And some of that also goes into the organization design of, like, how do you split up the different teams, right? Like, you probably want a different type of culture and a different kind of team for the SRE team that are maintaining and rolling out your core systems, your core security roles, and so on, right? Like, there it's maybe fine that they're not shipping 15 times every day, right? Like, but if you have the same culture on that team as the product engineering team that are experiencing on checkout flows, then you're never going to build anything exciting.
All right, we got about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to put our panelists on the spot because we didn't actually discuss this question in the prep. So, Vishal, I'm going to start with you because you're the guy who said, throw me any question, I can deal with it, no problem. Let's suppose you had a founder say to you, what's the most important piece of advice that you'd offer, early stage founder, with ambitions to kind of get trajectory, get growth? What's the one, key piece of advice that you provide? Then we'll go to Christine and Matt.
Just get real comfortable with failure because it's going to happen all the time. And just try to do a little bit better every day, seeing when the next failure will happen. But failure is a big part of the journey. Certainly done a lot of it myself. But getting comfortable with that being the case, try to test your way into things you can't understand. At some certain scale, I mean, I think we're kind of all there. There are no answers to the questions we have to solve and the problems we have to solve. And a lot of it comes down to, like, highly educated guessing, trying to experiment your way into things. But if experiments don't work, you got to take ownership for it, especially if you're the person that said we should do it. Learn and move on quickly and have a pretty short memory on things that didn't go well and try to find the next thing that will.
All right, so changing the mindset in terms of failure and, kind of experimentation, quick fix. Christine, one key piece of advice that you'd provide to somebody kind of contemplating early stages of a startup?
Yeah, for sure. First off, I just wanted to say that I deeply empathize with the short memory piece. I think, mountaineers, alpinists, and entrepreneurs all have benefited from forgetting very quickly the painful parts and only remembering the glory, so it's a useful trait to cultivate. In terms of what advice I would give, it would be pick one problem that you're going to solve and stay ruthlessly focused on that problem. anything that's not the core problem that you're building a product to make better, you should delegate, push aside, buy a product off the shelf, use an API. The whole sort of benefit of having such a rich SaaS ecosystem these days is that you can delegate whole classes of problems to some other organization that essentially is an expert in that problem. Nobody these days builds their own payment solution, does their own feature flags, builds their own integrations. There's solutions for all these things off the shelf, and the more you can focus on the problem that you're trying to solve and sort of like save the brain power that would have been spent thinking about all these auxiliary things that are important, but not a key part of the innovation that you're bringing to the table, the more likely your team is to be successful and to actually be able to move the needle on the core problem that you want your team living, breathing, thinking about in the shower, sleeping on, and I think that makes a really big difference over the long run.
Okay. Matt, to wrap up, you got 60 seconds. One key piece of advice to early-stage founders.
One key piece of advice that one of my good friends and mentors kept giving me many times over and over as a very early-stage product-oriented, engineering-minded founder was the phrase, a product is not a company. A product is not a company. And it's easy, like you're so focused as a product thinker to think always about like the features you're building, the stuff you're building. But if you want to build a business, you have to actually build a company. And you have to figure out how do you build what is the real overarching value proposition and problem you're solving for who? Who are your customers, and how you're building the organization that can solve that problem the best through some product, right? Like through a product you have now and products you're going to build in the future. And I think really just getting that repeated to me over and over about, again, in the early stages, a product is not a company. That helped me a lot in changing my thinking and really starting to think from the early stages about like how am I building a company and a business and an organization rather than a thing or a set of features.
Okay, some great advice, great insights. Please join me in thanking our panelists, all right? And enjoy the balance of the conference.